Hi everyone, and welcome to this webinar with InRiver and Lionbridge on how to sell more and faster on your global markets. My name is Rasmus Carlson, and I'm a solution architect at InRiver. With me, I have Mats Söderberg, Worldwide Channel Manager at Lionbridge, one of the world's leading translation agencies. Hi Mats, welcome on the call.
Hi Rasmus, how are you doing today?
I'm good. So I was wondering, translation is, it's such an anonymous industry, really. So what do you do at Lionbridge?
At Lionbridge, I am responsible for collaboration with all the content platforms and the integrator community, all the guys that is actually working with the end customers. Since our business is changing so fast and being dependent on our customers' digital transformation with all the new systems and so on, we just simply have to invest to make sure that we can work closely with them, and that's my task and mission.
Sounds like a good idea. And I'm very happy to have you with us because Mats is really an industry pioneer when it comes to creating automated processes for large-scale translation operations, and he's really an expert on how to optimize this type of work with the multilingual content, and we'll make sure to pick his brain on this later on in the call. With us on the call is also Joachim Landgaard, who is the e-commerce manager at Skistar, a Scandinavian alpine travel company that was one of InRiver's and Lionbridge's first mutual customers. And Joachim has joined us today to explain how Skistar made huge savings by automating their translation and localization process. Hey Joachim, welcome on the call. What's your favorite skiing destination?
Hi Rasmus, thank you. I would say that my favorite destination within our company at least is Hemsedal in Norway. We have 6 different destinations today, but Hemsedal is my favorite, and if I'm not going skiing in Nordic, I really like the Swiss Alps as well.
Sounds good. Yeah, and to we'll talk to you a bit later on in the call, especially when it comes to skiing and how that relates to translation. And that usually isn't something that has people jump with excitement, but I'm super excited about today's session because before joining InRiver, I'd been in the translation industry for some 15 years. But to be really honest, I actually did my first translation gig in 1983 when I was 8 years old. It was one day I was browsing the Lego catalog, which I did pretty much every day when I was a kid. And so one day I realized that these chunks of text in other languages in the same catalog, they were probably saying the same thing, just in a different language. So I pulled out pen and paper and started copying the English translation of the Swedish text. When I was done, I showed my mom. I was really proud, and I said to her, "Look, Mom, I just translated this into English," because that's what I thought I'd done. And she was like, "Yeah, right, okay, well done, son." And she wasn't probably all that impressed by my copy skills, but I was hooked. It felt like I'd cracked a mystery code or something, and I continued searching for more stuff to translate. But I started to notice a pattern, because sometimes the translation for the same words were different, like the names of the building sets or the figures or whatever. I didn't realize it at the time, but I'd actually discovered one of the major translation pitfalls: terminology inconsistency. Fast forward 20 years to my first years as a professional freelance translator, I was often surprised and intrigued by how often I got to translate the same material or variations of the same over and over again. It seemed like a total waste of time and money. Now that I'd studied linguistics, it was clear to me that a major source of terminology problems was the lack of inconsistency in the source text. Even though we worked with what's called translation memories and terminology databases, people often weren't using them. The translations were inconsistent and took longer time to do. So I had to do a lot of copying and pasting text between different versions of files. And just to skip past all the boring details of that, I'll just conclude that the translation process by default includes a lot of time-consuming, boring, and actually quite expensive manual processing work. And that was great news for me as a translator at that time, because it meant I could charge my clients huge money just because they didn't have the knowledge about how this technology works. This was about 10 years ago, and around that time, many companies were realizing they were paying way too much to have their content translated into all these languages. I mean, there's the direct translation cost for translating the actual words, but because of all the processing and manual work involved to have someone work on the files, copy paste, email back and forth, and keep track of the latest version, etc., you need to increase that by a factor of at least 3 or perhaps even 4. And so it's not uncommon for large companies to pay millions of euros to have their stuff translated into all the languages they work with in their local markets. The major part of that cost is actually just for someone to copy paste and send emails. So let that sink in for a moment. Most of your translation cost is not for actual translation. The Globalization and Localization Association estimates the global language industry to approximately 40 billion euros, with a yearly growth rate of about 7%. But the real costs are usually hidden in the sense that many of the hands-on tasks are distributed among a lot of staff doing manual work, and paying millions for someone to do these boring manual tasks is only one of the pains. Another challenge is that this process actually gets in the way of getting your products to market fast enough. Because if your data is not available in a structured fashion, having it processed for your local market simply takes too long. For example, when Nike or Adidas or one of the other well-known shoemakers release a new shoe model, a lot of the sales take place during the first week after release. And so if you're a national sports outlet competing against other resellers of the exact same shoe, if you can cut your time to market from, say, 7 days to 4, you'll be the one selling the vast majority of pairs of that shoe. And after the initial search, the market is pretty much dead. And the only way to get from 7 to 4 days is to be extremely organized with your processes for managing your product information and the processes for translating and localizing the same product information into the languages for a local market. And this is true whether you're a manufacturer selling to many markets or if you're just a reseller operating only on one or a few local markets. So if you have product information that needs translation, there's a huge cost savings opportunity. And we'll get into the challenges of that and some of the solutions that we've seen over the years. So Lionbridge conducted 2 market research studies with eConsultancy and Aberdeen Group to identify 5 of the most common global content challenges. On the top of the list is the issue of creating information silos. This means that information is handled separately for each sales or information channel. This not only creates a lot of overhead costs, but it's also a major reason for information inconsistency, right? And so this situation only accentuates as new channels are added. And it's further complicated when products are sold in different markets and translation are required. This type of product information management structured in silos can easily be avoided by implementing a PIM, obviously, which, among many things, provides a single source of content to every channel where you need your high-quality content. So when you have this single source of content, that's absolutely necessary to be able to reproduce that content in a number of other languages in an efficient manner. Otherwise, your product information will just start deteriorating as local variants and a number of different versions are born. So remember the inconsistency that I experienced as an 8-year-old when I was browsing my Lego catalogs? It was sometimes frustrating that I didn't know what they really meant. To be honest, it actually didn't affect my desire to buy more Lego, but it's different today. Because we as consumers, and that's whether we're buying something as private persons or if we're purchasing on behalf of our businesses, we're so used to shop around between different resellers offering similar products. And if we don't get trustworthy and consistent product information, we're just as likely to choose another vendor that gives us the impression that we can trust them and what they're saying. So if we don't have consistent and trustworthy product information, that has a huge impact on brand trust and loyalty. And a very common scenario in many companies is what we like to call content spaghetti. I'm quite sure a lot of you are familiar with this, or whatever version of it you have in your organization. Many companies start out handling their small volume product information managed by several different people using homegrown systems or spreadsheets. Files, images, and documents, they end up on local drives. They're hard to find and reuse as new projects need to be undertaken. This way of managing product information might work for some time, but as the operation grows, so does the need for a structured way of managing your product information. And if this information is spread across your organization and there's no control over where it resides, there's no way of processing and organizing it in a fashion that allows a cost-efficient and consistent production of local language versions. And so, like I mentioned before, that's when it becomes expensive and it takes a really long time. And the consequence, apart from the cost, is that your time to market increases and the trust in your brand suffers. So Linebridge identified another 4 major reasons for global content failure. And I thought, Mats, maybe you could speak to just a few of these challenges.
Yeah, I think this slide is after many years of interesting discussions, both with the integrators, all these systems, but then of course with our end customers. I mean, we work with over 800 global brands, so you can imagine the level of maturity in each of these end customers is very different. Some are extremely mature, digital transformation is on their way, and some is just taking the first steps. But when you look back over time, when we got translation comes in, very late in the process. I mean, you write your strategy and everything, with the expensive guys with the dark suit. But once they're out, it's time for marketing operations, and a piece of that work is often translations. Meaning, if you have not thought about your localization processes, you'll run into these areas of pain, so to say. I mean, a siloed decision, I mean, that's something for the boardroom. Once a company grows so big that you start to create different business units and they stop to take decisions on just, well, unify their messaging and so on, you are starting to create silos, meaning that you have different systems, different processes, and all of a sudden you are talking to a global audience, but the guys that is sending the message are 5 different guys at the customer, meaning that you dilute your global brand, your global voice.
So
these days, yeah, sorry.
Just ask you something. That now that we know that translation can actually be a very costly process, now that we know that, why is it still that translation is usually handled like a last-minute decision? Why don't companies bring this in much earlier in the process?
Oh, I'll just be blunt. Dealing with translation is simply just unsexy. It's often manual work. You have marketing assistants, or if we're talking to other types of content, technical writers is dealing with their FrameMaker file for the manual for the product. It's manual, tedious work, meaning that the strategists that is taking care of the big picture don't take the language parameter in play in time. So there is a knowledge gap, of course. The systems today is very sophisticated, where there is language automation available. I mean, the kind of technology that we built together, for instance, so on. But it's people that drives these processes. Meaning, if you don't get training and awareness that the create, store, translate, and omnichannel publish your information, if that don't sink in, you'll end up, with the wrong decision.
Right. So just to just summarize, as your company grows, you start creating these silos, and you just lack global control, and in the end it boils down to there's really no cost control anymore.
Yeah, but if you can't manage your source content, you surely can't manage your localization processes, and you end up with the feeling that procurement is too costly with translations. That's what hits us, especially with customers that, I mean, they missed the new market release due to technical processes that hasn't worked. The system didn't put out the content in time, and I mean, all of these operative signals on that things is not right ends up with that translations is costly instead of just redo it and just get it right.
Yeah, and what's funny here is that a point you're actually making that I wanted to really carve out here is that this is not only about translation. You're talking about being on top of your source content.
Yep. Yes. That's for the customers that has been working with this for some time. Questions that normally back in the day when you were working with InDesign and your catalogs and with that old processes, questions that were meant for the ad agencies is now being put forward to us as a translation agency, because the pain points is getting into, I mean, you already mentioned it, terminology and then being consistent with the global brand. And customers start to understand that, okay, we are simply not using the technology in the right way, and it hits us, meaning that localization is for sure getting more and more attention. And it's due to single sourcing and better source content management.
Yeah, and I'd like to see that as the good news, because this means that there really are ways to regain control and cut your costs and increase the time to market, just like we'll hear Joachim from Skistar tell us more about in a little
Exactly.
bit. But first, just to put some numbers on what we've been talking about, I wanted to show some statistics from another of InRiver's partner companies, the systems integrator. They're called iStone. They analyzed what the product enrichment process, including translation, actually cost in terms of time spent. By the way, Matt, it was iStone who built your integration to InRiver. And what is it really, like this integration, this connector thing, and how does it work?
Yeah, when it boils down to, again, operations and automation, yes, we have a piece of code that is being implemented into InRiver PIM, and they're pretty much our order platform, which we have built into InRiver, meaning that you can create and store your source content, but with a click of a button in the PIM, you can put the translation order directly to us via web services. So it's full automation. And for this, we have chosen to collaborate with iStone for this, for InRiver.
Okay, good. So I'll give an example. In this example here, we're looking at a standard enrichment process for a setup with a company having 3,000 articles or SKUs, generating 600 new SKUs per year. They each have a bunch of images related to them, and the product information needs to be translated into 6 different languages. And again, I won't bore you with all the details of the process, but as we can see in this summary, the product information management process consists of 73 discrete process steps. I've counted all the dots, so I know that. Some of them are as simple as clicking a box to determine what products in your assortment should be related to other products or resources, or just send some text off to a translator or a proofreader. Now, many of these process steps can be automated either in a product information management system or by integrating to other backend services such as Lionbridge's Freeway translation memory system. And the point here is that you want to provide a means to automate the process, because it's really the process that's taking a lot of time and money to handle, not dealing with the content itself. Because if only the translation agency and its translators doing the actual translation has access to the information in a structured and organized fashion, they will be able to deliver within a much smaller time frame. And this, of course, requires basic control over your product information using a PIM system. You want to have control over your source content and integrating that with your translation agency. Now, if we look more closely at these process steps, we can see that most of the time spent is actually driven by the exponential factor of how many languages you translate into. So, because many of the process steps in working with SKU are related to translation, since the cost of that process is actually at least 3 or 4 times higher than the actual cost of translation. The more languages you add, the higher your total cost, which is, as we can see, exponentially related to the number of languages. Here's the summary again, and the vast majority of process steps are related to handling the translation process, as you can see in the column to the right. So the time spent on processing this manually, in this case here, with no process automation in place, is 391 man days. That's actually 1.5 staff working full-time over a year. Now this is really a worst versus a best case scenario, but a process optimization could actually cut the work time to only 33 days. In practice, the actual numbers come in somewhere in the middle of the scale. So as you can see, if you don't have a good system to manage this, in the end it becomes really expensive, and sometimes a business case of minimizing translation cost can in and of itself justify an investment in a PIM system. Not to mention all the other benefits of having an organized way of handling your product information, such as delivering the consistent message and cutting your time to market. So I think I've probably made my point by now, and I'd like to move on by bringing in today's special guest, Joachim Landgaard. Again, Joachim is the e-commerce manager at Skistar. They're the leading Scandinavian company within alpine skiing, and they operate a number of ski resorts in the Scandinavian countries, in addition to locations in the Austrian Alps. So translation is a really important part of business for Skistar. And Joachim, in the introduction for this webinar, we said that it's possible to cut your translation costs in half, but you've actually done better than that over the past couple of years. So what do your number look like at Skistar?
Yeah, and I would just like to start with Rasmus telling everyone that we're going to focus on the business area we call skistarshop.com in this webinar, because that's where we use the river and the river connector. For the traveling part of our business, we use Episerver, but we have a connector there as well. But we are to focus on river and the connector we have in place there. So the numbers are for using for the translation of all of our ski products, and like ski wear and skis and boots and stuff like that, that we sell online. But we have used the river and the connector to Lionbridge for about 2 years. The first year we actually cut the costs in half. And this year we're going to cut them again. So in total, in 2 years, we have cut the costs from around 60,000 euros annually to about 20,000 euros this year.
Wow.
So we made huge cost savings.
So that's a 40,000 euro in cost savings alone, just because you automated the translation process.
Yes.
Okay, but you still translate pretty much the same volume of information, you just do it more efficiently?
Exactly.
So you used to have a very difficult translation process in the past before working with Lionbridge through the integration to in-river PIM, and what did it look like?
Well, I think it looked like most companies maybe still do it, but we got all the product text and information in in one system, have to export it into an Excel sheet made up of loads of columns, then send it to our translation agency, get it back in the same format, and then checking through everything, looking at it, make sure it looked the way it should, and then import it again into our systems. So it was a very manual process with a lot of cut and paste in Excel.
And I know that that's how it looks like in many companies, even in bigger operations. And so there's definitely an opportunity to cut not only the cost, but actually to save a lot of time. Okay, so what does your process look like today now that you've set up this automated process?
Well, it's a lot easier and a lot more time efficient. We still import from the beginning. We get all the product information from our suppliers. We import them automatically into River. And when that process is done, we can just create a translation job in River by pushing a button. We then do a search for what products we want translated, drag and drop them into this translation job, and then push a button and set like a time frame and what languages we want the product information translated into, and then push a button. And about a week later, we get it back and just press import, and all the products are updated with the new languages as well.
That sounds easy enough, but I guess there's still some manual work to be done. So what's left for you to do hands-on, and especially what do you need to consider when you produce your source content?
I think we try to focus from the beginning. You should say that put a lot of time into our terminology list that we sent to River before we started everything. So all the core keywords or whatever that are very specific for our type of products, we sent in a terminology list. This is how we want that translated. So put a lot of time into that, making sure that that works perfectly, because that's where maybe the translation memory gets it wrong sometimes, or where the automated process gets it wrong. So put a lot of time into that. And then we try to use more maybe common phrases when we write, because we write everything in Swedish. So make sure you don't use specific Swedish phrasing. So try to use more common phrasing. And also because we're using an automated process and automated translation as well, we try to maybe if the products are similar or the models are similar, we try to write it in the same kind of way, because then we know we will get it cheaper as well. So maybe when we create the text in one language, we do some manual work to make sure that everything, when we translate it, it turns out really good. So I would say that, as you talked about, make sure the source is really good, and then the translations will be that as well.
You put a lot of time and effort into creating good source content and good terminology lists. I was thinking, Mats, I often meet customers with, they have a need to translate, and they're in a situation where they need to move on in their processes, but they're kind of stuck and they're unable to scale because they're stuck with this little quite small translation agency, and they say, we worked with them for a long time, they know our terminology, we don't really want to change suppliers. So what would you say to a company like that?
Company often run into this hurdle when they grow. They'll be working with a smaller vendor for quite some time. Yeah, of course, you build a relationship with the project managers, and you know this relation management. But business cases well, growth is painful, and you need a heavier solution. Of course, Lionbridge, we can inherit the memories, and often when we take over larger programs, we also inherit the relationship with existing translation vendors even, and down into individuals per country, translators or language assets. The only obstacle there is the relationship between the customer and maybe a project manager. Tech-wise and knowledge transfer, our business consists of building this for enterprise.
What you're saying is
but
that
again,
the terminology and the customer's preferred and specific language, it already exists in their terminology databases and translation memories. And so you're saying that these can easily be transferred to another vendor.
Exactly. Just make sure that the first advice, Lionbridge often do an analysis of the current situation at the prospect, helping them with a decision. And here the first one that comes on the table, memories and glossaries, make sure you own them. We still see cases where the smaller agency, translation agency, owns the memories and just hijacks the customer more or less into a legal situation instead of, I think you get what I mean here. Make sure you own your memories. That's step one when you grow and need to change into a heavier solution on language.
And just to clarify, when we talk about databases and translation memories and stuff like that, is it the machines that do the new translations, or are there still human translators behind all of this? Leading question.
Good. Yeah, it's a good question. Of course, it's another. If you are new as a translation buyer, and you hear all of these buzzwords with automation, and of course you get confused. There are two different ways to look upon this. You have automated processes. Okay, that means you have a CMS and you have an automated process to send content to any translation provider, meaning you have automation on process. But then we have automation when it comes to machine translation and so on. That means that we are having machines that do a pre-translation. Everyone says, it's like Google Translation. Sort of, but when you work with a specific glossary for a customer, it's targeted. Google is doing it in a completely different way. That's a separate webinar, by the way. Very interesting, though.
Yeah. And as everyone knows, it doesn't really work.
No, thank you for Google is a huge customer of ours, so leave it with that. But of course, just so that's the two different versions of automation. We make that clear. Machine translation, then we use post-editing by humans, for instance. Just making sure that we have the right phrasing and so on. So yeah. The combination of these two automations is very powerful. That means that you take away pretty much 90-95% of all human errors in the process.
I see. Okay.
And that's very, very powerful.
Yeah. So it's really a distinction between automation of process versus automation of the actual translation, which is still handled largely by humans, but assisted by technology to reuse previous translation.
Exactly.
And there are, of course, still challenges in this. And Joachim, back to you. What have been the challenges for Skistar during this 2-year process?
Well, I would say, and as you started, we were one of the first customers that worked with InRiver and Lionbridge with the connector in InRiver. So we had some technical difficulties in the beginning. The connector was very new. So I would say that has been a bit of a challenge to make sure that everything works and don't have any stops. But I would also say that during the last year, we don't have any technical difficulties anymore. And then you should also put attention to how the process should look like to be as efficient as possible within your workforce after you've done this transformation, because you will find that people that have been putting a lot of time into working with Excel sheets and cut and paste will now be able to do other stuff, and you need to have a plan for that, so you can do some other creative stuff with a lot of the workforce instead.
Okay. You didn't just sack people just because you saved a lot of money. You actually had the creative people do what they're trained to do and what they like to do, instead of cutting and pasting text in Excel sheets.
Exactly. I would say we got a lot of time to instead focus on other important stuff, making a really good source, improving the product data from the beginning, and really making an effort and being creative and working a lot more with the website instead of focusing on Excel sheets, and making sure that everything at least was in all the languages that we work with. Now we're comfortable with everything language-wise being in order. We can focus on the things that are really important instead, having specific information, having unique information, and that's sort of stuff.
Speaking of unique information, how do you decide what to translate and what not to translate, and how do you handle new content from your suppliers, for instance?
We usually translate all the information we get from the translator, from the suppliers. We have very few products that we don't sell to all of our markets. So normally we just make sure we translate all new information that we get. We have some products that we don't sell in all markets. It can be some specific products. Then we just don't include them in the search when we're doing creating the translation job. So it's a very easy, very simple solution for us to determine what to translate and what not. But as I said, we translate most of all product data we have.
So what's a typical turnaround time for translations, and how can you, if you even can do that, how do you select content for rush translations jobs?
Well, the normal procedure is around 1 week. So we create jobs at a time frame of 1 week, and then we recheck it 1 week later, and then 100% of the time we can just import it. It's done. If we have some specific products, as you said, maybe a new product that we really need to get to market as quickly as possible, we set a lot shorter time frame on the translation job, but we also send an email to our project manager at Lionbridge telling him that we have created a job that we really need done quickly. So it's a bit of a manual step in a rush project, but I would say it's not a big one.
And how many words do you translate per year on average?
Around 200,000.
Okay, so around 200,000 words. Wow, that's still a big cost savings of 40,000 euros down from your previous level. Yeah. How are you actually able to realize these dramatic, I must say, cost savings for your translation?
I would say that the automated process has saved us a lot of money. A really good price per word from Lionbridge. So make sure you have a good seller. And I would also say that the translation memory that we work with Lionbridge now, compared to the one we had at our older agency, is a lot better, which makes us save a lot of money on that as well.
Okay, and Mats, over to you. So Joachim said that they now have some other translation memories and handling that in a different way. How does that differ from from your competition? I mean, what is it that sets you apart as a translation vendor?
Lionbridge has developed their own translation memory technology in Translation Workspace. It was the first cloud-based system in the business. Simply depending on the size of our customers, we had to invest heavily in this technology to keep up with the pace of these customers. Luckily, this is something we have continued to invest in, and now all of our customers is taking part of the benefits of this system. And that's also a topic for a separate webinar. It's very, very interesting to see when the memory gets managed in the cloud, what you can do with real-time translation tasks, how you collaborate with translators on one specific task. And so there are a number of benefits with this system, and that is simply better than the competition.
Yeah.
But it's very, very interesting to hear a customer case like this when it just comes, hard facts. That's I just have another. Joachim, you're talking about your organization here, because when I started to think about this stuff for many years ago, I ended up on a train and overheard a conversation. It just turned out to be one of the procurement managers of our large heavy industries here in Sweden. And he was talking to someone in marketing because they were being hit hard with marketing assistants quitting their jobs. I just, started to discuss with him. 2 hours later, I just found out that it was, they were just about to onboard a collaboration with Lionbridge on language. But, starting to weave the web with all this information and say, what, isn't this the stuff you're talking about? You should, get into an IT project, buying yourself a system, making sure that all these marketing systems don't sit and cut and paste in Excel. And we start to laugh about it all and say, well, no one, depending on our silos, IT don't talk to marketing to make these decisions. And now I'm listening to you, it sounds like you cracked a nut, but so you're just the vibe in your organization these days from cutting and paste into something more funnier. Is it just a better working environment?
Yes, of course. I would say that before we did this, our marketing assistants or content assistants were always fighting on who didn't have to sit with the translation for a day. So it's no one wanted to do this work, and it was the most boring thing we had to do, and it was a lot of time put into it. So of course now when we just can push a button and simplify it, and get rid of it and get it back and push a button again, everyone's happier, and they can. All of them like to be creative and create good content, work with pictures and stuff like that, instead of just cutting and pasting in Excel. That's for accountants.
Rasmus, you remember just for like 30 minutes ago when you asked me the question, what are the signals that the company is being hit by the language hurdle? I mean, here you have it. Language is so low prioritized due to it's tricky to deal with, and no one really wants to do it.
Right.
Here we got the hard case, just proving it. It's very interesting. Thank you, Joachim.
No problem.
And what can be done about this? I mean, it's we've heard that language, at least in this context, it's not very sexy. It doesn't get people jumping with excitement, and still, clearly, there are signs that companies need to do something about their translation process. And how can we help people with that?
From my perspective, talking to there are two ways of looking on this. I mean, we have a knowledge gap within the integrator community. These guys are fantastic on the technical piece, making sure that in-river PIM works with the end customer, the process, all the strategy, and so on. Once that work is done, see you later, good luck. All of a sudden the customer sits there with a system, where are all the languages? This is stuff that I'm working with on day-to-day basis to add the language parameter that the integrator just picks it up as, you know, just prolong their discussion with the prospect or with the customer. Because again, the earlier this is being solved, the less pain the customer will end up in. Otherwise, the call to us is, hey, we bought a PIM. Where's the languages? Where to start?
Oh no.
Mean that we have to, we have to re-engineer stuff, you know, and you know, go back. So just to be proactive, you know, with in-river, with an integrator, together with Lionbridge, we have all the knowledge needed to get things right from scratch. I think that's when you take it down to the very pragmatic level on things.
Yeah, Joachim, how did you make this happen? How did you take the first few steps from where you were to actually creating a better process?
Yeah, I would say that we started the project with this business area 4 years ago. So we put almost a year into the project with just focusing on, okay, how is it going to look, how is it going to work, and I think as Mats said also, that in that process we were proactive. We said we need to put language as one of the priorities that needs to be working when we launch. We can't choose a provider or an integrator that can't help us with translations. So when we started the discussion with in-river at that time, we knew and we were told that there was a project within in-river and Lionbridge to start a collaboration, and that was one of the keys for us choosing in-river, because we knew that, well, in a short while we will have a connector that will automate our translation progress. So I would say that we had that with us from the beginning, that translation is going to be a part of this process of running a website and reaching different markets. And if we don't focus on that from the beginning, it's going to be very difficult to change afterwards.
I see. Okay, so you want to work with this from early on in the process, get on top of your source content, and talk to someone who knows how it's done. And
exactly.
that should be a couple of good first steps. Now, Matt, if I'm a company that wants to improve my translation process, we know we have some pains around this. It's costly, it's hard to manage, it takes a lot of time. The time to market is suffering, all of those challenges. How can we do something about it? What are the next steps in your view?
It has to be a part of the digital transformation that all companies are being hit with these days. If you don't go digital, your business soon will be dead. And the language wrapper on top of that is just super important. The signs we see, I mean, marketing results not reaching, you know, the wished for effect on international level. There are so many, I don't know where to start. It's just systematic across markets when you don't get on top of the topic. And our business is being hit quite hard if we don't proactively tag along with the customers. And it's all a challenge pretty much on which markets do we want to be in, and how do you tackle new markets. Often when you are working with existing markets, you have the lack of quality, the terminology, all of this stuff that we have talked about. How do we get into the boardroom on the customer level and make them to realize that the decisions being taken, if it's an IT-driven one or if it's market, any of these two silos is often the drivers that they need to change into a system and so on. Have these guys, the procurement guys, all the way up to the CEO level, add the language parameter how to send your message globally into the digital transformation strategy overall. I mean, I can't bang that drum more heavily than that.
Right. So it's really, as long as you have, I mean, as soon as you have an international operation with a translation need, this is what you're saying is this is really a question for the boardroom.
Yeah,
about it.
Definitely. If folks only understood, I mean, still, I mean, it's 2017 and I hear, oh, you got problem with your global catalog. Well, why don't you just upgrade your InDesign license?
Right.
I mean, let that one sink in for a bit. Yeah. So again, it's just knowledge sharing. That's the only key to this. I mean, we have all the kinds of solutions, technology, and so on, but unless management don't pick up on this, the new trends, the new technology, and so on, it's very, very hard.
Okay, but so a first next step could be to contact either yourself or me if you want to get a conversation going on this topic and how to move forward. And so
absolutely.
Thanks, Mats, for being on the call. Thanks also, Joachim. It was enlightening to hear about your case story, how you've been doing and how well it went. And
thank you.
Yeah. So thanks everyone, and anyone listening in or listening to the recorded webinar, feel free to get in touch and we'll help you out with your content and translation needs.
Thank you all.
All right, bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Hallå?